back to Watercolor Fundamentals. This will be episode 13, Clouds. So today I'm going to use some of the techniques that I've talked about in earlier episodes to create simple clouds. Nothing too crazy. We're going to keep it pretty straightforward. I've got everything I'm going to be using right here. I've taken basically a 7.5 by 11 size piece of paper, and I've taped it down onto a little coroplast board and just put a couple pieces of tape across here to section it off so I can do a few in here. I am using Arches, 100% cotton cold press paper. It's always a good idea to use the best paper that you can, just to get a more predictable result. It also helps if you're using the same paper all the time, because then you get to understand it a little bit. But I've also got a little bit of paper towel here, which you'll see for one of the exercises. Just a little mechanical pencil with 2B lead in it, a little Pentel P205, equivalent size 8 brush, which is a pretty good size for the spaces I'm going to be working in. If you're working on a bigger area, sometimes it's a good idea to size up brush. You always want to use, in my opinion, the biggest brush you're comfortable with. It just helps to fill areas a lot quicker, and since we're going to be dealing with some wet and wet techniques, you do want to work quickly. A little towel here for some moisture control for my brush, and a little spray bottle, and of course my paint. As far as your paint color for this goes, I'm just going to be using a blue. I'm probably going to use Prussian, which is, compared to ultramarine, a little bit cooler and also a little bit duller. So let's get started. Actually, I may even use a little bit of ochre. So it's always a good idea, whether you're using watercolor from a tube put into a palette, or whether you're using pans, to take your spray bottle and just give your paints a little spritz. I have previously put a little bit of water on here before starting this video, so they are fairly ready to go. And you want to do that just because that water will soak into the top layer of paint and help loosen up the pigment and make your life a lot easier when you want to get some paint and add it into a mixture. The other thing I've got off to the side here is a bucket, 3 wells in it, so I've got lots of water. And I will start by adding water into this left well here. And you want to make sure you have a fair bit of water, enough to cover the areas you're going to paint. And since I'm going to be painting this a few times, I want to make sure I've got lots. All right, so I'll go over here and grab some of my Prussian. And I'm not going in and cleaning my brush before grabbing the paint each time. I'm just going in and grabbing the paint and try to stay out of the bucket unless it's to get water, because you work hard to try to get a mixture prepared. And if you keep going into the bucket and getting water, you're constantly playing this game where you're adding more water all the time and you're adding pigment, and then you kind of wonder why your value is never getting strong enough. All right, it seems like it should be pretty good. Another little good idea, once you have what you think is a good mixture, is to keep some spare scraps of paper around. And I like to just kind of keep that so I can do a quick little test strip on there and see how that value looks. Also keeping in mind that whatever this looks like right now, there's a good chance it's going to dry a fair bit lighter. So if I look at this and I go, that's perfect, it's wrong. So I want it actually a little bit stronger than that. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit more pigment and add that in here. And just give that, yeah, it's a little bit stronger. Okay. So I'll just put that off to the side. And clouds. One thing to think about is what the clouds actually look like. And sometimes if we just think about and draw a cloud, they never really look entirely like that. We end up drawing some sort of symbol for a cloud that looks like something in Super Mario Brothers or other comparable side scrollers. Clouds are often a fair bit more organic looking, and they have a mixture of hard edges and soft edges. So we're going to be playing with creating some soft edges, and I'm going to go through two ways of doing that. The first one we're going to use is from the episode on soft edges. It's kind of the technique number one I like to use for creating soft edges, which is where I will apply the paint, clean my brush, and then go in and soften the edges. Now, for this technique, when I paint clouds in this manner, I don't generally do what I'm about to do, but this is just for clarity so you can kind of see what's going on. And I'm going to draw a little just kind of organic shape here. Now I'm drawing this fairly big, knowing that once I go in, I'm going to kind of paint up towards the edges of these lines in here, and then I'm going to be softening them. And when I soften them, some of that blue is going to come inside. So you don't want to draw your kind of ideally sized cloud and then paint up to that, because then if you go in and try to soften those things, you're going to end up with something way smaller. So I want, a nice little cloud in here. But I need to make the drawing a little bit bigger if you're drawing it. And as I mentioned, I don't generally draw it in. This is just for you. So we'll put that down there. And I take my brush and I make sure it's nice and loaded with paint. Again, like I mentioned, I'm using an equivalent of about a size 8 brush. Now it is quite loaded. I'm getting my brush. Don't just tap the tip of your brush in there and think you have enough paint. Stick that sucker right in there and load it up. Okay. Now you just want to kind of maybe give it a little bit of a tap on there just so I'm not splashing paint all over the place. And I'm going to, as quickly as possible, come in here and just kind of building this shape out, grabbing some more paint. I don't want my brush to run out and start dry brushing. And I do want to kind of keep this thing active. So you'll see that I kind of go back over some edges, back into areas I've already painted, just so I can keep this wet, because when I want to come in here and soften these edges, I need them to be wet in order to do so. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And I'm keeping an eye on the paper. I'm making sure that I don't have big puddles of paint sitting anywhere. And then once I get a shape in there, I clean my brush, control the moisture on there, and I will just kind of start coming in, and I'm pointing the brush into the paint and then using the belly into the white area, which means sometimes you're going to have to change the angle of your brush. And this is where moisture control is important too, because I don't want to come in here with a whole bunch of water, because then it's just going to kind of back run into the white, or run out into the blue, which is going to create a bunch of cauliflowers. So you do need to make sure you get a bunch of moisture out of your brush, just so I'm not dropping a puddle of water in there. So there's a real simple way to go in and do a nice little cloud. I got a nice little blue around here. I've got some nice little soft edges. These little harder edge bits all work, and this looks pretty nice to me. So there's cloud number 1. Now we'll do cloud number 2. This one's a little bit more different, though it's similar. Once again, and you can also see, before I do this one, you can also see how the pencil lines that are there, maybe this shows up, maybe it doesn't, but I can see them quite clearly, but the edges of my cloud has ended up inside quite a bit. So if I actually drew it to this side, then my cloud would end up being even smaller. So for the next one, we're going to use soft edge technique number 2, where we're going to have some water in the place first, and then we're going to paint around it. So we're going to take clean water, and then we're going to paint up to the edges of that water. So I've just got clean water in my brush here, and what I'm doing is going in and painting the shape I've drawn with nice clean water. And I have positioned myself so that I can kind of see the sheen of the water on the paper. And that allows me to make sure that I've got a nice even distribution of moisture. And you want to take your time with this. You don't want to just slap in a bunch of water and think that it's good, because the more I go around this shape, the more the water is going to saturate the paper, and then it will stay nice and active for me while I paint around it. It doesn't mean I can go totally slow when I start painting, but it does give me just a little bit more time. And when you're getting started with watercolor, it is a very dynamic medium, and time is a very important aspect to master with watercolor. I'm still working on it, but it's getting there. Okay, so I think that's got a nice amount of water in there, and I'm just getting the excess moisture out of my brush. Again, I don't want to introduce excess moisture into my paint, because I want to keep the value the same. And then with my brush, we're just going to go around and paint into this cloud. And then I'm just going to quickly, and this is why you want a nice size brush, so you can get in here quickly. And fill the area as fast as possible before any little edges have a chance to form in your paint. So there's another nice little way of going about and doing a cloud. Depending on how I'm feeling, I like these ones. They always look kind of nice and fluffy. You can see little bits of hard edges that have kind of popped in there. This does end up with a lot more soft edges, but both of them work quite well. And if you're just doing plein air sketching and you just want to drop in some clouds really quick and then move on to whatever else your subject is going to be, either of these is a really good way to go. I do find this one to be a little bit quicker, but this one I can control a little bit more. If I was going to go really slow and try to, work in a more of a hyper-realistic manner, this definitely would probably where I would head, spending a little bit more time with it, trying to control the edges and that sort of thing. That would be where I would go. So we're going to do a couple more. I'm going to do this one again, and then we're going to use a little bit of paper towel, and we'll show you what we can do with that. I think I still have enough paint there, so I'm not going to worry about that. So we're going to draw another little shape. There we go. And then I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to do the exact same thing as before. I'm just going to go in and fill it with water, taking my time. Making sure that the area is nice and wet. Just like so. There we go. And then I'm going to load my brush up. And we're going to come around the outside of this shape. Grabbing the excess here. Filling around. And again, you want to be really quick about it so that none of these edges have a chance to dry. And then I'm going to take a little bit of paper towel here, and I'm just going to give it a little crumple. And out in some of these little areas, I'm just going to quickly drop and dab, and I just kind of keep rolling it, because if you don't roll it, you end up stamping blue down. So I'm just keep rolling this thing, trying to find little tiny bits of white. And then you can just create small little wisps. And if you do it while it's still damp, a lot of these will kind of soften. You don't want to push the paper towel into the paper. You just kind of want to quickly dab it into the paper. And you just lifts a little bit of your paint out and creates small little, I don't know what you call them, small little clouds. So there's another little technique you can introduce, and you can use that, in conjunction with this one, or, as I did this one, adding that into there. You could even just paint blue and go in, and as long as it's still quite shiny, even if you look at this, if I tilt it a little bit, maybe you can see the sheen that's on there, right there. That lets you know, as long as my paint looks like that and has that sheen, I'm pretty comfortable going in and doing most ever what I want to do when I paint. So there is another little cloud there. Now I have kind of run out of paint. We're going to do one more here. So I need to add some more water. So we'll just add some water in there, and I just need enough for this last one, so I don't need to put as much in as I did in the first. So I grab a bunch of pigment, Give that a little mix. And again, it's always a good idea. Just give it a little check. It's maybe a little bit stronger than the other one, but I think that's gonna be fine. I'm gonna clean the brush, and I'm actually gonna introduce an additional hue into here. Just gonna put a little bit of warmth into the bottom of the next cloud. And I'm gonna use an earth yellow, so like an ochre or sienna, as long as it's an earth pigment, not one of my synthetic yellows. Reason being is you use those and it's almost a green guarantee. When you use an earth pigment, an earth yellow, it's a little heavier. And I can force it with the Prussian to make green, but if I just lightly put it in like I'm going to do, and I'm also making sure that this is a fairly thicker paint, so this is more of a watery tea-like consistency. This is a little bit more like a thick cream. Okay. And we will draw a little shape here. And what I want to do is just put a little bit of warmth into the bottom of a cloud. And I will just use the second one, the water first, and then the paint. And I generally prefer the look of the first one, but it does require a little bit more time and control. But the second one is just as nice too. You can get a lot more dynamic effects with this one, I think. The first one, you can kind of sort of create the cloud you want. This one, you accept the cloud you get. All right, so I think I've got this all good to go. So once again, I'm going to load up with some blue, controlling a little bit of moisture out of the tip. I'm just putting the tip into the towel, not the whole belly. I want to keep the paint in the belly. All right. You can see this is being brought right up to the edge of that water. As soon as it hits the edge, it starts to soften into the water. We get this along the bottom like so. Bring this across. And then I have another cloud. And now what we want to do is clean the brush. Get the excess moisture out of your brush. So I don't want to introduce more moisture into my yellow here. And I'm just going to load that up. Control the moisture, and I'm just going to run a little bit of yellow into the bottom there. And if I just drop that in, right, control the moisture because you don't want to have too much moisture in your brush, because if you come in, you saw when I released there was a little bit of a release of paint from the brush. That's why you want to kind of go in and control it a little bit so that when you do lift your brush, because every time you break contact with the paper, it's going to draw moisture out of the tip of your brush. So if you have too much in there, when it releases, there's a good chance it's going to take way too much out. So control the moisture in your brush. That way when I released, it's not too bad. So you can see there's a little bit of green starting to occur there, but I don't really have too much of a problem with that. But the rest of this is all just kind of sat here nicely. So there are two different ways to do clouds, a little additional technique you can add to kind of create some additional texture in there, and then doing the same thing as these two, but introducing a little bit of warmth in there. You can also take a little bit of a mix up a violet and put a little bit of violet in there into the bottom and give it a bit more of a moody look too. But that's what I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully you enjoyed this, learned a couple things, and keep on painting, everybody. Bye for now.